Well, I first met Wendy Bourgon on our 100 Huntley Street full circle bus trip to Pennsylvania. It was 2007. And as we chatted and rolled along, I realized that the Lord was moving in her life in exciting ways. I had no idea, however, about the significance of earlier chapters in her life, or that we would be talking about them just 3 days before she blasts off to Zambia. Did you have a sense of this, Wendy, back in 2007 when we were just talking about the stirrings in your heart?
Well, yes, I did, Moira. Back in 2007 when we were chatting on the bus, I had already been called by God to this type of work, but I wasn't really sure exactly how I was going to accomplish it.
What an interesting potpourri. At that time, I think you were still representing a very popular frozen fruit company.
I was.
I know we had your product in my freezer. And you're just such an elegant woman. And the plan is to go to a very needy area of Africa.
That's right.
Essentially on your own. You don't have a banner ministry sending you, or, and this is so courageous.
Well, thank you, but you know, it doesn't feel that way to me because God's in the middle of it, and when He's the one that's leading you and He's the one that's partnering with you, courage I don't think is something that I need to even think about.
I want to come back to this, but there's a reason for Africa. You have tasted the people there, what God is doing there, certainly the need there. We have just a few pictures. Tell us what we're seeing and when you were there.
Okay. That was in 2006, August 2006, and that is in Zambia in a place called Solwezi. And I'm just enjoying just a loving moment with some wonderful children there.
Oh, look at this lamb chop.
Oh, she's having some shima for dinner. That's a little sweetheart in a village very close to Victoria Falls.
Maize meal, of course, is the staple here too. They call it nshima?
They call it shima in
Shima
Zambia.
in Zambia, yeah.
That's in Kenya. In
I love
2007, I went to Kenya and had an opportunity to meet in that picture with a group of school children, and my heart's just bursting with joy.
Now, you have a master's in social work.
I do.
And you were telling me that out of university, you kind of had a notion you might like to be involved with some sort of global outreach to needy people.
I did. I really felt that stirring. But for one reason or another, went and started looking in the job market and ended up working in an area, a different area, with juvenile delinquents for a while.
You also had a very interesting, do I call it a hobby, with horses?
Well, it was a pretty serious hobby. I showed horses for most of my young life until I was in my early 20s. Yeah.
Interesting associations there. Who did you work with?
Well, one of my trainers was Jimmy Day, who some people might recognize as actually being on the Canadian equestrian team.
Wow.
Yeah.
Multifaceted woman. Now, I've known you a little bit, getting to know you since 2007. What I just have learned is that you were a prisoner of fear from very early. You tell me from childhood, fear ruled your life.
Yes.
What was that about?
You know, it's so hard to know what fear is about sometimes. It's when it's all consuming, the root of it is not something that I could relate to, but specifically when I graduated from my MSW, it just took over my life. And I lived every single day trying to figure out how to put that fear at bay, just trying to get through every single day without it taking over.
Now, obviously, it was getting the upper hand because you describe yourself for some chapter as agoraphobic and even considering ending your life.
It was very uncomfortable, to say the least, living in fear all the time. And I did get to a point where I just thought I couldn't take it anymore.
Nothing specific. Nothing, I mean, you don't mind me sharing that you have a marriage that failed. Was that feeding into this? I mean, a woman's number one fear is abandonment.
No, this fear came before my marriage. It started before my marriage, yes. Yeah.
It was so intense.
It was so intense.
Well, something drew you to church. Tell us about that.
Actually, two things happened simultaneously. I was seeing a therapist at the time. His name was Ivan, and he was a lovely Christian man, but it wasn't Christian therapy, and I wasn't a Christian at the time, and I didn't choose him for that reason, but God chose him for me. And my son at the time was just in grade 1, and he came to me and said, "Mama, I would like to go to Sunday school." Now, at the same time, my therapist had said to me, as I was saying to him, "How will I ever find peace? How will I ever find it?" And he said, "Why don't you go to church?" So with those two combined, I made the decision, to go.
Now, one day, and I love this part of the story, something very unexpected and meaningful happened as you were sitting, I think, in the back pew, or pretty close to the back.
I was. Yes, in fact, I used to go to church on Sundays. My son would go into Sunday school, and I would sit at the very back and cry. I was so unhappy, and I just didn't see, where my life was leading, and I was feeling pretty hopeless. And then one Sunday, when I was sitting in the very back, crying as usual, I had an amazing experience. Everything seemed to go just a little bit lighter in the building, and then I heard a voice. And the voice told me that I would never be alone again. And then an incredible peace came over me. So hard to describe, but it was an incredible peace. And I have to say that at the time, not being a Christian, not having really read the Bible, not having this sort of knowledge of how God works or how Jesus can be in our lives, I really didn't understand what was happening to me.
You didn't know that it was the voice of God.
Not right away, no.
And yet your experience was the very gift Jesus promised.
That's
when he
right.
said, "I am leaving you a gift.
That's right.
My peace I give unto you,
Yes.
not as the world gives."
I'd never heard that before, so I didn't know.
But you were enjoying it.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was such a new beginning for me. But I have to tell you that I did have to go and find out what happened to me. So I went back to that same therapist and I explained to him, I said, "I was sitting in church just like you told me to. And an incredible thing happened, and I explained it to him, and the tears started to come down his face, and he looked at me and he said, "Wendy, that was God. You just had a conversion experience." And from that moment on, that's when I really started to investigate the man, the person, the God that had spoken to me in church. I started watching Huntley Street. I started listening to Christian radio. I started going to any Christian event I could get to. I started going to seminars. I started reading the Bible. I had to get to know this person who had changed my life.
So the story of fear, the agoraphobia, behind you.
Absolutely.
And you started moving. I bet you moved up in the pews, too.
I did. I absolutely
From that back
did.
row.
Yeah, I did. I started becoming active in the church. No question about it. Yeah.
And
I
now
was chair of the worship committee. I was on the congregational council eventually. The minister at that church really encouraged me.
And you really got involved. But at what point did you give your all to the Lord?
I think that it likely happened around the time that I had another experience with the Lord in this same church, in this same pew. I was sitting there listening to a sermon one day. I don't even really remember what the content of it was, but God spoke to me so clearly, and he told me that he wanted me to become a missionary. Now, at that point, I didn't know any missionaries. I didn't really know, other than pastors or nurses or doctors, I didn't really know why God would call a social worker to be a missionary. So that became a whole new investigation for me. And I started going around. I went to Mission Fest, actually, and started going to the booths and asking people, why would God call me to be a missionary?